I be heard? May I be heard? Can you hear me now? I think you can. I didn't leave the building. It's this damn update on OBS. Every time it gets you every time, dude, because you do it and you forget that it resets all the settings. Oh, come on. You mean no? Ha 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 ha. Good one. You got me. All right. So yeah, I remember I saw one of the super chats, the first one. I apologize to the other two people. I'll have to go look at that other lame 7-minute stream to get the other super chats. I don't remember what they were. This chain is fresh. Feel fresh. The Feel Fresh crew. What are you putting links to other videos in the chat, dude? Oh, the other stream. Putting links to this stream in the chat. Why are you doing that? Anyway. I don't know. We'll have to start over here. I remember the first question is about Michael Martin. That's an easy one. The Transcendental argument for the non-existent guy. So anyway, the Tang failure was a big fail. Tinder Horrors first show? I don't get it. All right, welcome. How are y'all doing? Do I still have a VCR? No, it's in storage. Doesn't work no more. Don't work no more. Yeah, that old string's gone, bro. But we got the whiteboard. You know, shit's getting serious when the whiteboard is out. That's racist. Whiteboard, what? Got my coffee. We're going to talk philosophy. So I will be interacting with the chat, obviously, because I don't guess everybody's going to send me super chat questions. If you want to be assured of your question being read, except for the people on that other stream. Sorry. If you want to be assured, send me a super chat and we will assuredly read your question. Stop talking about anytime all the streams talk about is the house. It's not dirty in here. It's not a nasty kitchen. It's not dirty. It's not boomer. It's not none of those things that y'all say hurt my feelings in the chat. Tell me to clean my place up. I live in an awesome boomer condo resort surrounded by boomers that bang on the walls all night, building Harley Davidsons, building Xanax pills, building Harley Davidsons out of little Xanax. There'll be a boomer driving a Harley made of all pills, and it runs on pills, runs on meds. But yeah, so we are going to talk about philosophy. Boomer kitchen confirmed. If it's a boomer kitchen, all the appliances are 80s. They don't have any tech involved. You can't have a refrigerator with sensors on it. You'd be like, how's this work? Anyway, we're not here to talk boomers. We're here to talk Philosophia. Does this couch have logos? It's kind of a boomer couch. All the couches in this condo place are furnished. So I just went with the furnished option. So remember, I'm the author of this book. This book has a lot of good reviews. It's something that you want to read. The link is below to purchase this book. Signed copies at my website. Yes, they all come signed from me. And it was tax season, and boy, did I have a fat tax bill. So you need to help me out and buy my book. And that book was, of course, Based and the Bomb. And so then there was part 2, which is even better. Part 2, I'm really proud of. I'm proud of part 1 because it's my first book, but this is a lot better. And everybody agrees this is a lot better. I only got 10 reviews. By the way, yes, leave me. I always forget to plug all this crap. Leave me a nice review on Amazon if you like the book. Don't buy from Amazon, though. Buy from me. If you see these links below, you can go to Jay's Analysis and get the signed copies from me. And if you tell me a little note, I'll draw you whatever you want. I'll draw you a picture. I'll draw you a movie character. I'll draw you a picture of Bill Cosby with a giant Venus. Whatever you want. I'll draw you whatever you want. Man, taxes are such a scam, dude. You wouldn't believe what I've had to pay in taxes this year. You wouldn't believe it. It's crazy. So thank you. I see that we are going to get some super chats here. And let me see some more. Housekeeping. Our friend on the internets, good friend David Knox, a convert from evangelicalism. Buff, bald dude here, Dave. He sent us his great apologetic book, The Case for Mary. And this is geared for your Protestant type friends and families. And so thank you, Dave, for that book. And I told him I would give him a promo. I haven't finished it yet. I've looked through it. Looks good. A lot of good argumentation here. So if you want to get Dave's book, I presume in his case, Amazon would be the best situation for him. Unless he has a website. I'm not actually sure if he has a website for the book or not. But don't get my book from Amazon. Get it from me. But leave me a good review on Amazon. And also Goodreads. Please leave me a good. Also, I always forget, my podcast. You can leave me a fantastic review at iTunes for the Jay's Analysis podcast. I think there's 140 reviews, almost all 5 stars. Thank you all very much for those kind people who have reviewed. So many kind people. A lot of D-bags though. Have you noticed that service in the world, the service industry, is it me, or is it getting worse and worse and worse? I got my car did today, and the dude was a total D-bag. And I'm like, bro, I don't know cars. And he starts telling me all this stuff, and I don't know what he's talking about. So I try to talk to the guy, and he's like gloating over this like he's got the one up on me because I don't know shit about cars. I don't give a fuck about cars, bro. So this dude, it was just totally rude, dude. So then I'm thinking, how do I believe this dude when he gives me the bill? You know what I mean? Then you're in that weird situation where you're like, I don't want to make him mad because I just watched U-Turn last night, which, by the way, I've decided U-Turn is a really good movie. The Oliver Stone movie, or 2 nights ago. U-Turn is funny, dude. I didn't like U-Turn when I first saw it. I was like, what's going on? I only caught half of it. And I didn't realize that it was a dark satire about Hades, I think. It's kind of a Dante trip to the underworld situation. But there's some really funny scenes with Joaquin Phoenix in that movie. It's a really, really excellent Oliver Stone satire movie. In the vein of After Hours, if you've seen Francis Ford Coppola's After Hours. No, wait. Martin Scorsese. Sorry, Scorsese did After Hours. That's his 80s satire. But the reason I bring up U-Turn in relationship to the douchebag mechanic guy was, if you've seen U-Turn, you'll know what I mean. Because the Billy Bob Thornton character is hilarious in U-Turn. Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. Like, if you know what happens in that movie, you don't want to piss off the mechanic because, I don't know, he can pull cords out of shit. I don't know. However cars work, he can make the things fuck up, whatever. And that's, so you go watch U-Turn and you'll see what I mean. And by the way, I'm also convinced after watching U-Turn that Nick Nolte and Gary Busey are the same homeless man. I've become convinced of that. That's my conspiracy. They're the same person. Yeah, but see, I didn't have time to shop for the doctor because my engine light came on, and I thought, well, I better pull in because I don't know what's going on. So, yeah, you cut the brake lines. He could stuff trout in the engine so then it would stink or something. Oh man, I was really biting my lip though. It's like I was biting my lip, and I was like, all right. I was about to get mad at the dude. I was like, no, I'm not gonna get mad at this guy. I'm just gonna, because he could screw my car up. But it seems like everywhere, you know what I mean? Like anywhere you go, it's like social justice warriors work everywhere in the service industry, and they're insane. So you don't know what to do. Anyway, we're not here to talk about the dumb crap I did all day. We're going to talk philosophy. So several people said do a philosophy Q&A. So this may turn into a nightmare. I don't know. This may be a bad idea, but I thought, okay. And we will do, I'm sure a lot of you, of course, since it's a philosophy Q&A, are going to come with movie questions. Because if I say it's a philosophy Q&A, in comes all the people who want to talk about movies. If I say it's a movie Q&A, in come all the people who want to talk about theology. So anyway, yeah, I'm sure people are going to want to talk about other stuff, and that's okay. So again, you will be given preference with super chats, right? Because that's how we make money on these things, right? This is part of my income now is this. No, the social justice warrior wasn't an auto mechanic. I'm saying that, like, if you go to a restaurant, I'm nervous because the pink-haired person is taking my order. And are they going to squeeze their AIDS juice in my fish that I ordered? You know what I mean? Is she going to wring out her purple hair and get her skanky juice in my sausage? Pate? I don't even know what sausage pate is. Does that exist? Is that a thing? That's what I'm saying, man. People going crazy. But everybody's going nuts. That's what's happening. And it's like I was saying on Boiler Room last night, they're all on pills. So I don't totally blame them, but I kind of do blame them because, I mean, if you chose to be a normie, dude, you have every means at your disposal to figure out what's going on. And most people don't want to know what's going on. So you get what you pay for. All right, let's start with philosophy chat. So I'm going to do the question that came in first. I apologize. It was on the stream that I screwed up when OBS updated. And it was about Michael Martin's Tang, not NASA astronaut Tang, the transcendental argument for the non-existence of God. So this was something that in the 80s, Michael Martin and some other clowns kind of cooked up as a means to respond to Dr. Bahnsen about the transcendental argument. And it really completely bombed. It didn't go anywhere. Mainly because when Bahnsen and Michael Martin were supposed to debate, Michael Martin backed out. So he didn't show up. So I think Bahnsen debated himself, which is hilarious. But, all right, audio's low. All right. You know what? I bet it reset the settings when the OBS updated. Yep, it did. All right, so how's this? This should be better. Does it sound better now? Honk, honk. What is your religion? We are Orthodox here. Is there poontang in Eastern philosophy? There's poontang in every philosophy. Poontang is the only philosophy. Yo, dog, if they was offering them astronauts poontang, I'd be going to the moon. You know what I'm saying? I'd be going to ASA, not NASA. Get it? All right. Shit, I'm on a roll today, dude. Honk, honk. Yeah. So, again, get used to, if you're using OBS, you guys know what I'm talking about. It will trip you up when you update it, and it resets everything. So Tang is the transcendental argument for the non-existence of God, which I'm sure they thought was extremely clever. Not that clever, but it bombed, right? It didn't go anywhere. I guess there might still be some nerds on the internet that Google around and try to resurrect this dumb old argument, but the argument itself is really a fundamental misunderstanding of the transcendental argument. So actually, if you really want the in-depth refutation of Tang, there is a whole talk that Bahnsen did, and actually it might be a series of talks just on Michael Martin and just on Tang, and there might even be still an audio somewhere of Bahnsen debating himself as Michael Martin, which is hilarious. But really, Tang was a misunderstanding of what the argument was. And so it was an attempt to kind of twist it and make it really, again, clever and try to say, well, actually, we have to presuppose that there is no God. And then it would rely on all these kinds of philosophical assumptions and presuppositions that are themselves actually pretty absurd. So it's really nothing. I mean, there's really nothing to it. Let me see if I could find a brief. I mean, I've never even heard anybody even use this since the time of Bahnsen, dude. Transcendental. Let's see if we can find a. Here we go. Transcendental for non-existence of God. And then there's a link at infidel.org. Ooh, edgy, bro. Yeah, and it's this old so it's a 96 article from Michael Martin. Yeah, see, that's exactly what, yeah. So he's citing Bahnsen here, the New Zealand rationalist. New Zealand. Kiwi. Atheist Kiwi. Some Christian philosophers have made the incredible argument that logic, science, and morality presuppose the truth of the Christian worldview, he says. Correct. Because logic, science, and morality depend on the truth of this worldview. Yes, that is the argument. Advocates call it tag. He says, what I will do, however, is not only refute tag, but I will show how one can argue the opposite. Logic, science, and morality presuppose that Christianity is false. Yeah, we know. So I call this Tang. If Tang is a sound argument, then tag is not. Okay, so blah, blah, blah. Both arguments, blah, blah, blah. Perhaps logic and science could be grounded on something else, but we'll set that aside. He says the burden will be on them to refute Tang. Unless they do, tag is doomed. Okay, so he says, let's start with logic. And since you donated $10, I'm gonna work through a little bit. We're not gonna do this whole article. It's not that long. It's pretty short. So let's see what the crux of this is. I haven't looked at Tang since probably 2004. Let's consider logic. Logic presupposes that its principles are necessarily true. That's correct. However, according to the brand of Christianity assumed by Tag, God created everything, including logic. Yeah, there is a created aspect to logic, yeah. Or at least everything, including logic, is dependent on God. Yes, we would agree. If something is created or dependent on God, it is not necessary. It is contingent. The created aspect of logic is contingent, but logic itself, insofar as it reflects the divine mind, is not contingent. If the principles of logic are contingent on God, then they are not logically necessary. Now, so this is basically boiling it into a version of like, could God create a rock so big that he couldn't pick it up, and if he couldn't do it, that he ain't all-powerful, dog? Actually, in our worldview, God is limited. Okay, so this is an important misunderstanding that a lot of people have. The terms omnipotent or all-powerful, something like that, that doesn't literally mean he could do everything. For example, God cannot make himself not exist. So in other words, we don't define omnipotent by what we want or by the absurd. We define omnipotent by what it means within the context of our paradigm or worldview. And that's really only the way to be consistent in our paradigm, in our worldview. In our worldview, truth, power, omnipotence, etc., those things are going to be defined by God himself and what he's revealed about himself. So there are limits to those things, right? For example, God cannot make himself into an evil being, right? So in that sense, God's will is limited, right? God cannot literally will himself to be evil. That's why nominalists are wrong. That's why what we call theological voluntarism is wrong. This is a heretical position that later got fleshed out on the part of the nominalists and into the Protestant realm of some Calvinists and some Lutherans, with the idea that God could literally damn the Virgin Mary. This is the debate in the Middle Ages. Like, if God is sovereign and free in his will to the extent that he could literally just go back on his will immediately afterwards? And absolutely not. That is nonsense. Completely heretical. We would never say that. And that's because the way we define omnipotent, the way we define those words, is within the paradigm of what God's revealed about himself. So he is omnipotent in the sense of how he defines omnipotence, which is, in other words, in continuity with his own nature and power and his other attributes. So we can't come with a made-up definition of, oh, well, I think omnipotence must mean that God could make a rock that he couldn't pick up, dog, right? It doesn't work like that. Yes, God is limited. Well, that's not omnipotent. Yes, it is. It's omnipotent within the confines of our worldview. So he's already kind of off to a wrong start when he's trying to argue that logic, if the principles of logic are contingent upon God, they are not logically necessary. No, they are, right? And so there is a logos of God, there is a divine mind, and it does reflect a rational operative principle that God has. Now, God in himself transcends logic. He transcends these laws, and he's also the precondition for those laws, and that's necessary in terms of what we say about God, right? So we have to be very careful and not identify God with laws of logic. God is not identical to math. Okay, this is kind of the Platonic error. The Pythagorean Platonic error, they make the mistake of looking at the fact that, well, there are these abstract, invariant, immaterial principles, laws of logic, concepts, essences, all these kinds of things, right? Mathematical concepts, forms, geometric forms, and they're obviously not identical to matter. So the assumption on the part of the Platonists is that it must be identical to God, right? And this is their version of kind of Platonic simplicity, right? The ideal forms are absolutely identical to the monad. We don't believe that. That's why you have the essence-energy distinction, for example. But Michael Martin, of course, has no idea about any of that. So he's really just kind of trying to identify a way to make logic contingent. But we don't believe it's completely contingent. It's not exhaustive of God, but it is accurate in one aspect or one ray of divine light, you could say. It's not the only thing that we learn about God. God also has love, right? That's another ray, you could say, like rays of the divine that come to us, the energies. Logic, you could say, is one of those. And yes, human logic is not identical. It's not exactly the same because what's in our mind is created. But the created can reflect the uncreated in terms of the energies or the logi, the logos and the logi. This is part of the reason why we believe in that. So he goes on to say, let's see what else he says. So God could make the law of non-contradiction false. No, he could not. See, this is the problem here because he's assumed that the idea of God transcending laws of logic means that God can do anything to the laws of logic. The law of non-contradiction is absolutely true for, you could say, the human realm, the human dimension. All right? But it's only true to from a certain degree or to a certain level. So when we try to take the law of non-contradiction and apply that to God himself, that's not accurate because by definition, one of the books that will help you understand that is this. God transcends those things. Now let's make another point here that transcending something or something being a paradox is not the same thing as a contradiction. This is a common misunderstanding in philosophy. People think that, well, if something transcends it, then it must be able to like destroy it or negate it, or it must be nonsensical and it's irrational. No. The mere fact is that God transcends the normative laws of logic, which are, again, a reflection of an aspect of him, does not mean that he's irrational. That's not true. There's no need to say that because a mystery or a paradox is not necessarily the same thing as a contradiction. Even normie atheist logicians and philosophers will tell you that just because something is a paradox in philosophy or logic, it doesn't mean that it's a contradiction. They're two different things. And so if you want a treatise that helps you understand that, I would recommend reading the Divine Names of Dionysius, okay, because he actually deals with a lot of these questions. He talks about the names of God, what they mean, how we predicate things of God, and there's a little bit about number theory in there as well. So even the numbers, when we say God is one in terms of his nature, his essence, and we say that God is three in terms of his persons, we're not saying that God is identical, absolutely identical to the number numeral one. No, we're not saying that. Because God is not absolutely identical or defined or absolutely equal to any name of him. They are analogical, right? It's an analogical predication, but it's not an analogical predication of the divine essence, which is where we differ from the Roman Catholics and the Thomists. It's an analogical predication of, as Basil says in letter 234, the energies, the rays, the operations that come down to us. So right away, Michael Martin doesn't know what he's talking about. He doesn't understand what we say. He thinks he's crafted this thing by saying that the laws of logic are not necessary because God could just make them into something else. So he started, the flaw here is starting with a definition of God that's not what we say. And this is typical amongst atheists. They're rarely interested in what we actually say or believe about God. They're more so interested in the straw man, the mischaracterization. So the first error is his statement: if the principles of logic are contingent upon God, God could change them. No, God has no intention of changing them insofar as they relate to this dimension, this world. Now, in the next life, or the saints that have gone on, it's pretty obvious from Scripture, from Revelation, that not everything works the exact same way with time and space relations, right? With the saints hear our prayers; they're present at the liturgy. And Jesus, when he's resurrected, he kind of transcends time and space in his resurrected body. So it doesn't exactly work the same way in the spiritual realm, higher dimensions, heaven, whatever. But it still is in some way related to this realm. So we don't know how all that works, but none of that means that God is necessarily altering the principles of logic. And even if you look at the way the laws of nature work, for example, for us, the laws of nature, they're not independent laws that are operating out there. They're the laws of God's providence that God has set in motion, and he's directly present throughout the whole world via his energies. So they're not laws that operate independently of God, right? And if there's ever a miracle, all a miracle is God doing something in a different way, because he's behind the providential operations of the natural laws, if you want to call them that. The problem is, again, the natural laws, that was all conceived of, maybe not initially, but eventually it led to the idea of banishing God from the natural world anyway. So he goes on to say, we see the problem there, is that we don't think that. If the principles of logic are contingent on God, they're not necessary. God can change them. Thus, God can make the law of non-contradiction false. God can arrange the world so that propositions and its negations are true at the same time. This is absurd. All right. Now, first of all, we don't say that, but even if I lost my place in this article. Let's see here. Oh, okay. Yeah, we don't believe that he has done this, right? So what Michael Martin's trying to do is construct this idea that God is like this chaotic thing, and that he's not bound by what he's already revealed about himself, right? So God, for example, cannot lie. It's impossible for God to lie. And on Martin's argument, it's as if God can lie and then not lie. And being beyond the created order in his mind means that God can basically do whatever he wants to. So this is just a figment of his imagination of what he conceives of how God would have to be. Like if you had invisibility power, like all you would do is walk around and peep in showers or whatever and look at the chicks. Like that's how he's viewing it. Like, oh well, if I had omnipotence, I could just do anything. I could make ice cream taste like pizza. So then he says, so therefore, because God could arbitrarily change the laws of logic, etc., then logic is not dependent on God. Actually, again, what's funny about this too, and this is not an aspect of absolute divine simplicity that we've really covered yet, but there is another aspect where you can critique absolute divine simplicity that, as it goes into its alchemist and nominalist and later Calvinist versions, which is the idea of theological voluntarism. The idea that if God's will is absolutely identical to his essence, and if God changes his actions at any time, or if he changes the law, right, the moral law, whatever, then it seems to follow that God absolutely could do this, right? If the moral law is a reflection of God's nature, his essence, in Thomism and Roman Catholicism, and in Protestantism, by the way, later on, Rome's dogma of absolute simplicity is absolutely no different in any of the strands of Protestantism at all. They all completely accepted it. And the Calvinists were being consistent, some of them, by saying, well, yeah, if God can decree that such and such an action is just on the basis merely of his will, then he can also decree that it is not just on the basis of his will. So actually, if Bahnsen were around and Michael Martin and Bahnsen were debating, technically I would have to give one little point to Michael Martin here, because Bahnsen, unfortunately, I'm sure would have assumed absolute divine simplicity without question, just because he wasn't aware of these orthodox issues. And so Martin actually would have had a good point here, because if absolute divine simplicity is true, then yes, God could, if he so willed, because in the Calvinistic view, God's will is completely sovereign, right? God's will is what determines good and evil. God's will wills evil, not just in a permissive sense, but in an active, decretive sense. In that case, then, Michael Martin has a point, and God could logically decree that the law of non-contradiction is false. But that is not the deity of historic Christianity or the Bible. God cannot lie. God cannot decree something false. So that's my initial critique of Michael Martin and his nonsense. I forgot who left that question in the earlier fake stream. All right, National Remnant, $5. I just got an Orthodox study Bible, and all of your talks have helped me setting the groundwork to understand when I read it. Good. Yeah, there's definitely going to be more, Lord willing, theological talks. We got to get back into the minor prophets. I'm going to finish Zechariah. Zechariah is kind of a difficult book. The only reason I've held off on it is because I want to go through the apocalypse again, because Zechariah is it's a lot like the apocalypse, and further flesh out some of my ideas on eschatology before trying to speak on a difficult book. And the last chapter of Zechariah is pretty difficult too, because he seems to be talking about a period in which there's still nations and there's still blessings and curses on the nations, but it's during the Messianic period. I'm not saying it's not premillennial. That's heresy. We don't believe premillennialism, but it's an interesting question as to what the last chapter of Zechariah is about. But I also have been thinking too that it would be good to do some practical stuff too, like Proverbs, Ecclesiastes. Been meant to do some talks on that, just because a lot of what we've talked about is pretty heavy stuff. A lot of divine simplicity, a lot of really involved subject matter, philosophic subject matter. But we also need to do, and I did do Jeremiah, and I did do some of the minor prophets, but we need to tackle Isaiah. We need to tackle, Genesis eventually, and Genesis creation, early man. So yes, we will get to all those things eventually, I promise, Lord willing. But thank you, National Remnant, for that $5. I'm glad to hear that this is resonating with you. It's clicking for you. That's great news. Humble Bee, $5. I'm a homeschooling mom. Can you recommend any good history sources for upper elementary, middle school ages? I get asked that kind of question a lot, and I have helped people kind of pick out like pedagogy for homeschool and stuff, but the problem is that most of my focus, my training was graduate level, so I'm not the best at picking out the homeschool, high school, early grade school, whatever, or middle school era stuff, and that's kind of vague. So it's kind of vague to I mean, what area of history? Like the ancient world or the church fathers period, church history, Middle Ages, America? I know a lot of people, just for kind of the history stuff, they go to like the Protestant homeschool stuff, which I'm sure a lot of that's fine. Although it's going to be tainted with like evangelical nonsense about church history, So I'm not sure how worthwhile that would be. Just on history, I would say if you're looking for history of ideas and philosophy that you're going to teach them, I could tell you to read the Father Copleston set of History of Philosophy. That's a classic. That one's pretty good. But if you're saying for them to read, that would be too difficult. For them to read, I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't know for that age group what history materials there are. Now, I'm sure in the chat, if somebody knows, feel free to help Humble Bee, because we have a lot of minds here. If you're in the chat and you know what's a good history course for elementary, middle school age, then put some recommendations for her in the chat. That's just really not my arena, my field. Sorry, I wish I could help better. I'm sure somebody in the chat will know, because a lot of people have kids, a lot of people, have homeschool situations going, and I'm sure they can let you know. It's getting dark in here. I'm going to turn some more lights on because somebody's asking a question about that's going to require a diagram. Give me about a minute and let me plug this light in over here and we can get some more light going. It's too dark. I can't see anything in here. Let me put some music on just for a second. I'm not going anywhere. It's just too dark in here. Dyer, Jay's analysis. Dyer, today's analysis. Dyer, today's analysis. Dyer, today's analysis. Dyer, today's analysis. All right. We got a weird, it's like neo-noir up in here now, dog. So the first thing on the next question, if you read to the end of the essay that I did, which somebody published, by the way, they published in an ebook. I didn't do that. But if you look at Goodreads, this essay comes up as a published ebook. I hope you're not selling my essay, bruh. I mean, the essay's free, but Numbers Prove God, which I'll put here in the description. So I'm going to add that to the description, and I'll also put it here in the chat. Towards the end of the essay, you'll see the Stephen Clark paper on Maximus the Confessor, and that helps outline this train of thought about apologetic proofs for the existence of God and how Christianity really solves that. So if you remember what I said a minute ago, where's my pen? About the this is weird lighting. That was kind of cool though. It's like it's almost Halloween lighting. What I said about the logos, the logoi, right? The mind of Christ, Paul says we have. And if you read in that essay down to the bottom of the Stephen Clark paper where I cite him talking about the mind of Christ, he goes into this point about the mind of Christ being the bridge between the created and the uncreated. Because he as God, took on our human nature, full human nature, right? A rational soul, as the Fathers and Council said. Each man is a microcosm of the larger cosmos, as you'll read in St. Maximus. I'm trying to go to the Stephen Clark section in my paper. Maximus, this is small writing, dude. Boomer, can't read. All right, let's see. Here's the Stephen Clark paper. I wrote, we have an answer to the question at hand. Man is never away from God or the infinite. God is presupposed in every act of predication. Anytime the infinite is considered, we are not and cannot be dealing with some impersonal force or a meaningless void, but rather a personal being. This crucial aspect is important for distinguishing the position being argued here from Platonism. Platonism might agree with the argumentation I've given so far about immaterial invariant numbers, concepts, etc. But for Platonism, the ultimate monad or mind is impersonal. This is what that Aristotelian pagan dude was saying. Impersonal mind, impersonal ideas. That doesn't make any sense. It is not hypostatic and is not directly, in the Platonic view, it is not hypostatic. It's not directly related to the world of flux in which we dwell. It's an inaccessible, wholly other. And it's incapable of explaining how or why there are many things in this world at all and not just one thing. I brought that up. Why are there many? To the Aristotelian pagan dude. If the uncreated logoi are posited, then it's necessary that they be contained or related and associated together in some omniscient mind. We need a divine mind to house and hold and string all these truths and preconditions together. It also has to be able to relate all of these infinite potentialities and relations. This divine mind cannot be cut off from our realm, which Platonism would have. It is also in Western theism cut off because of Thomism and absolute divine simplicity. This paper's really good. I'm not being a dick. I'm saying now I see one. And by the way, this has been shared like 1,000 times. It is at this point that Maximus the Confessor brings, before it was nuked. The only reason it says like 30 shares is because it got nuked on the old site. It's at the point Maximus brings an enlightening argument to the question of the divine mind, the logoi and the created realm. Stephen Clark writes, "It is bound to sound un-Platonian, and perhaps it is less un-Platonian than it sounds, even though Plotinus himself does not endorse it. The particular way that I have expressed the issue may be significant. And speaking of the possible worlds, I've suggested that all such worlds might be real, and that the infinite possibilities of creation are all realized somewhere. In the style of modern physics or the multiverse," he's asking a question. Torstein Tollefson has suggested that it is here that we can see a real distinction between the pagan and the Christian metaphysic. For the pagan Neoplatonists, all the ideas are contained in the divine intellect, and they are mirrored in a phenomenal reality. So all potentialities appear to have to be real in Platonism, although not necessarily all at the same time or in the same region. For the Christian, only some ideas are realized, right? Because God is not identical to his essence. The ideas are not identical to his essence, and so the created forms that are based on those ideals are not necessary. God is a free, willing creator, not a Platonic emanator. Oh man, I just lost my place. Okay. For the Christian, only some of the divine ideas are actually realized and created. Yes. The ones somehow selected to be companions and associates of the incarnate logos. Right. And that's why all of the logoi are one in the logos. And then I go on to say, there's a specific section where he talks about Clark begins to consider the possibility of an incarnate, omniscient God, Christ incarnate, citing Maximus. But what he says is relevant here because the similarity to Plotinus is undeniable, but there are some definite differences. No finite mind in the biblical view can be omniscient. For the logoi to be contained in the logos and the structure of reality to hold constant as it does, there needs to be an infinite, omniscient mind to relate all of these uncreated logoi to the created realm. Our finite minds cannot do this and cannot hold or contain all of these realities, right? This is why you see in paganism, in Platonism, in Kabbalah, everything that we say about Christ, they all predicate of the individual magician or sorcerer, right? He's the real chariot of the God. He's becoming divine. All the stuff that we believe about Jesus, right? They predicate to the individual ritual magician because they realize they need a divine mind to encapsulate within the here and the now, this uncreated realm. How do we do that? The incarnation is the only way. Let's see. Where did I leave off? No finite mind. Okay. Yeah. There needs to be an infinite, omniscient mind to relate and house, so to speak, all of these uncreated logoi within the created realm. Our finite minds cannot do this. They cannot recall. They cannot see. They cannot know all of these and their interrelations, apart from scant fragments and vague notions that we as finite beings have in our mind. We see through a glass darkly. We can use symbols and terms to stand for the infinite, but it really is something mysterious, right? The idea of infinity. But it is something necessary, and it is assumed in any act of predication. The infinite monadic points within space, right? The dot, the monad, and the many infinities which they contain within themselves are directly connected to the uncreated logoi. Dr. Clark finishes his paper with a paragraph that directly speaks to my argument about numbers. What do we change by seeing or saying that it is Christ who plays and is at work in everything? To be is always to be, or to begin to be, something in virtue of some single call to being. And being something is always for us to be a member of the whole, right? So it's holistic. Failing in that, we fail in being at all. But where are we to look? In the pagan cosmos, we can be guided only by memories and imaginations. Yes, that's why Plato said it was all reincarnation. We were remembering when we were in the one, in the golden age. Looking towards some order of the beauty or stars or mathematics or some virtue that we can internalize. But perhaps this is the problem. On the one hand, there is nowhere short of the whole world to serve as the guiding image for each and all of us. But on the other hand, that whole world, though we speak of it as if it were unified as a single beautiful cosmos, does not in fact exist save in the fragmented or the barely sociable mirror of the many souls seemingly caught up in it. Exactly. You need to be able to relate all things to one another in a meaningful way. To speak of any whole, to speak of the universe, assumes some universal relationship between all of the particulars. But you can't do that in just a human mind. You need a divine mind to do that. The one and the many. Without soul, there is only darkness. If we are to believe there is a single cosmos, it must be that the cosmos is contained in some single soul. If there is a way of seeing things right, then there must be an intellect, and indeed that which contains and decrees right answers. But if there is no equivalent single soul, then the phenomenal world is always far astray. Our experience is always delusory and, by comparison, multiple and transient. If we are to believe not only that there are right answers, but that we can discover them, it must be possible for God himself, he says Zeus, he's speaking of the Greek view, to become incarnate, or for there to be someone somewhere who has the mind of God, and not just an ethereal abstract thing, but in his actual life within time and space. That's Christ. For Plotinus, the incarnation was the world soul herself in all reality, which is nonsense. At once our elder sister, Gnostic, and at the same time the fullest expression of soul herself. But maybe there has to be a more particularized embodiment, correct, and one that can be grasped from within this synthesis. That man is each man is a microcosm of the larger. And then he goes on to say that, well, we don't have this divine mind of ourselves. We get it through an incarnate God. So, when you understand that, when you read my essay, and when you read the argument that Stephen Clark is making, then what we see is that it's not just a question of numbers, but all of these other things that you could list that are, you can call them transcendentals or categories or preconditions. We'll call them transcendental preconditions. Okay. We're just going to list some. And somebody asked the other day, is there a perfect list of all of them? No. How could there be? I mean, I guess you could try to come up with, I don't know, it'd be a very difficult task, but let's just look at a few, and we start to see that although on the surface this argument might seem really obscure, it's not. It's actually pretty, man, these lights just don't work with this. Okay, so let's take the first one. Time and space. Okay, now this is a transcendental category that you cannot empirically verify. And don't give me the low IQ reply of, well, I have a watch. Your watch is not the same thing as time itself. Time itself is some kind of abstract category. Doesn't matter what you want to define it as. Point is that it's not proven to exist merely by empirical investigation. Yes, I know it's a measurement. It's a measurement of the rate at which light travels or whatever. It doesn't matter. I don't care about how you define it. The point is that it's not defined or known merely by empirical investigation. But it's presupposed in the way humans interact in the world, right? We experience the world from beginning to middle to end. There's no human being on the face of the planet that experiences things in reverse, right? And we also experience and learn things within a spatial field, a visio-spatio-temporal field. That's how we learn things. There's not a human being on the planet who does it in a different way. We are beings constituted such that we learn things in a spatio-temporal field of vision, right? In the here and the now. Well, how do you prove that empirically? You can't. It's an assumed transcendental precondition of knowledge and experience. The self. You cannot empirically demonstrate that you have a self. It's presupposed in all actions of cognition, communication, noetic energies, ratiocinations, etc. There's no test tube, no microscope that's going to show you the self. That words have meaning and that they can convey meaning to other persons. It's another transcendental category. There's no empirical verification that you are transmitting the right meaning to another brain, another bunch of gray matter. It has to be assumed. The past. The past is a transcendental category that you cannot empirically prove exists or existed. It is assumed in the way that we as humans experience time and space and operate. Universals. Right? There's no empirical verification for universal categories, invariant concepts, numbers, etc., but that we know they exist. Ethics. Right? Where is the ethics under the rock? Where in the microscope? Where in the test tube are the ethics? They are nowhere there. So they are assumed. These are just examples of things that are, and again, you can come up with more. But these are examples of transcendental preconditions for the possibility of even having knowledge at all in this world and operating in this world. None of these things are proven or known by empirical investigation. Are they related to empirical investigation? Yes, but they are presupposed in empirical investigation, and they are not the immediate subject of any empirical proof or investigation. So does that mean we cannot know these things or prove these things? No. That's where the transcendental argument comes in, because it is an argument based on the denial of any of these things as leading to absurdity. So when we come to the question of God and God's existence and the mind of God and the mind of Christ, etc., that I just mentioned in the Stephen Clark paper that I cited in my paper, we can ask another question. How do these different things relate to one another? Because our experience of the world is not chopped up into only having spatio-temporal relations without a self, right? No, that would be nonsensical. Spatio-temporal experience assumes a self that's having the spatio-temporal experience. And when we speak or write words that have meaning to convey that meaning to another chunk of gray matter in somebody else's head, it assumes that they have a self. It assumes that these words and these meanings are entering into spatio-temporal relations to convey that meaning, becoming mediums for information being conveyed from one person to the next. What it is to be a self is partly bound up with the past. I'm not an abstract category. I'm not a Platonic form. I'm not the number 7. I'm a person who has a past, a life that began at a point in time. Part of my past is partly what makes me up, and you and everybody else, right? So there's no neutral kind of, I don't know what it would even be, like some abstract neutral self that doesn't have experiences. That's impossible, right? Universals, universal categories, universal laws of logic, universal in terms of predicates. These are presupposed in speaking. So the point is that when you just take a little sampling here of these kinds of things that are not like material things, and you say, well, these don't operate on their own, they all work together. Yeah, exactly. So how do they work together if there's not a God that holds them all together? That's the argument. Because what Platonism at least shows, in the Platonic argument that Clark was interacting with, it can only go so far, and then it's terrible. It screws up at the key point, because they can point out some of these things, and then they say, oh, and the answer is just that it's all a number one. It's all just the one, man. No, it's not. You need a mind, and the human mind is not enough to encapsulate and relate all of these things together in all of their different particulars in every different human being's life and existence. But if you believe in God the way that we speak about God, that's exactly what he does. He fulfills this precondition. He is the ultimate precondition for all the other preconditions. That's the argument. So I hope that's helpful. It does at first seem a little kind of abstract and whoa, that's weird. What? But I think when you understand it, it's like, oh wow, yeah. What else would it be? But nothing else even makes any sense if it's not God. I mean, it's not the human mind. The human mind can't do this stuff. No finite mind can do it. And the atheist can't even get past like why there's even needs to be a mind anyway. Because they don't even think they have a mind. As they sit there touting their own mental acumen, which they actually don't have. That's the great irony of that. But anyway. So I hope that's helpful for the transcendental argument question. Dalton, have you been sneaking out of Roadhouse? Have you been sneaking out of busting butts down at the Roadhouse, those drunk rednecks, and doing your Zen philosophy? And macking on Kelly Lynch, Dalton? Can you rip a dude's throat out, Dalton? If you don't know what I'm talking about, go watch Roadhouse. Dan the Man, 199. Thoughts on William Lane Craig? Well, William Lane Craig, unfortunately, is an Apollinarian. And Apollinarianism is an early church heresy that substitutes for a rational soul in Christ the person of the logos. So the irony here is that Christ is not fully human, because this view mistakenly thinks that the soul, the rational soul, is a faculty of person. It's not. Soul is a property or faculty of nature. And that's why will, which is connected with soul, is not a hypostatic property. If it was a hypostatic property, there would be three wills in God. So that right there shows that William Lane Craig is a goofus. On top of that, he can't decide if he believes in the transcendental argument or a bunch of dumb Kalam arguments that don't work very well. I mean, the problem is that for apologetics, if this is all true, what I'm talking about, you can't just make teleological arguments that a Jehovah's Witness and a Scientologist and some other cult could join in. It doesn't work. So he's always been like, how you can't, this doesn't make any sense. So he would be more consistent if he were going to do the transcendental, because he'll do it sometimes. He'll use transcendental argument sometimes, and then he'll go back to these dumb normie style arguments. That and his Apollinarian heresy, because he doesn't understand Christology in the early church. And then he just borrows the essence energy distinction from orthodoxy, acting like he didn't get it from Eastern Orthodoxy? Come on, dude. You're not fooling anybody. I will say that his book on creation is good. I do recommend his. I think it's still on my recommended reading list. If it's not, I need to add it back there. So that's what I think about William Lane Craig. In many ways, he's a competent scholar, but some pretty goofy, glaring errors. Armand Babakanian. That's a Bayes name, dude. $5. Hey, Jay, what are your thoughts on Alistair McIntyre's ethics of communitarianism? Do you agree with Aristotelian ethics or divine command theory? That's a good question. I think that question came up in the at one point in the traditional philosophy and metaphysics lectures. Somebody had a question like that. But yeah, those are good questions. So yes, I did have to read multiple things from McIntyre in undergrad and grad school. And there's definitely a lot of insights in McIntyre. In fact, if you read the book Liberalism and Its Critics, there's a really good essay from McIntyre in there about how humans understand language beginning, middle, to end. And he's not intending to do a transcendental argument, but it almost verges on that, because he actually in that essay almost argues what I've been arguing, that human being, just in one of the examples of the transcendental preconditions, that human beings have to understand interpersonal communication between humans, language, functions in that beginning, middle, end way. And our lives are beginning, middle, end. And history is beginning, middle, end too, right? So we don't believe in the pagan cyclical view of history. But if you read that essay from McIntyre, he's really good there, almost verging on a transcendental argument for language. But as an Aristotelian, I don't think he gets it. Although, again, it is very ironic, because it's in the metaphysics that Aristotle does the transcendental argument, right? One of the first. Now, when we come to the question of communitarianism, I've read Whose Rationality, Which Justice, which has, again, some good insights. And again, the thing with Orthodox theology is that we wouldn't say that either Plato or Aristotle are completely right, nor would we say that Plato or Aristotle are completely wrong. They both are insightful, and they both have serious problems. So there's not really going to be an Aristotelian ethic that we could necessarily latch onto. So in fact, if you listen to the debate that I did with the Aristotelian pagan guy, Tweetathon, a couple days ago, and then if you listen to the post-debate analysis, I do a pretty thorough critique of the Aristotelian ethic, the golden mean, eudaimonia. And for subscribers, I hope to have that part 2 done either tonight or tomorrow, because it is a half and half. So there will be more to explaining the problems of paganism and the Aristotelian scheme. So you could say that our I don't really have a problem with the term divine command theory. But again, we have to be careful that we don't understand it in the sense of the way Michael Martin was taking it with the transcendental argument for the non-existence of God, as if it means that God arbitrarily makes these commands. We don't think that. We think that the divine rules for morals, the Ten Commandments, moral law, they're actually a reflection of God's own holiness, his own nature. Now, ultimately, they are revealed to us in an energetic way. But we are told that God himself is holiness, God is goodness, God is justice, etc. And all those things are attributes of his, or energies, we would say as Orthodox. So technically, I guess you could say it's divine command theory, but it's also not arbitrary, because those divine commands are not out of accord with who God himself is. They are reflections of his own character, you could say. And there are areas where Aristotle's ethic matches up to that in certain areas, sure. But again, one of the problems with the golden mean is that the golden mean itself isn't capable of telling you where to start. The golden mean assumes that you already kind of know the two extremes. That's been a classic problem with Aristotle's ethics. Hunter, 84, 20 pounds. Thank you, Hunter. Who is your favorite non-Christian philosopher and why? I get that question a lot, and it's kind of a tough one because, after a long time when you reflect on philosophy, you have to kind of pick through and figure out and reformulate who you liked for what reason and why. And you realize that there's always a mix of good and bad in the non-Christian philosophers. I mean, in many ways, there is a sense in which if you read Dionysius, he's not non-Christian, but I'm saying when he's interacting with Neoplatonic ideas, there are insights in Neoplatonism. But you have to be really careful with that because for the first several centuries of the church, people went nuts with Neoplatonism, and it caused centuries of heresies and problems. And they just went crazy with it. So there's a fine line between appreciating Plato and Plotinus and finding insight and going crazy with it and trying to meld the two. I mean, that's essentially why Origen is a heretic, because of this, because of his divine simplicity view, right? And that's because he tries to merge this Platonic system, even though, if I recall, he didn't actually read Plotinus. It doesn't matter. He's still merging some weird Platonic thing with Christianity and the Bible. And he's eventually condemned extensively, not just because of apokatastasis. There's an extensive section about Origen and why he's condemned in the Confession of St. Sophronius, accepted at the Sixth Council. The people that act like, Origen wasn't really condemned, and it's just over a misunderstanding of apokatastasis. No, that's not true. That is completely not true. It's an extensive condemnation, beginning with his rejection of Genesis. So they're just lying, or they're ignorant. All these people are just liars or ignorant. Anyway, so get back to non-Christian philosophers. I mean, you're going to learn stuff from Plato. You're going to learn stuff in Plotinus. You're going to learn stuff in Aristotle. And you can read Heidegger and Husserl and learn some neat stuff. You can even read Hegel and Kant and learn some neat stuff. But there's always the danger of going nuts with it. And a lot of young guys, I've seen this a lot with people that I tutor, is when they encounter somebody, they go nuts with it. It's like, so we start learning about Plato. They're Platonists. And you haven't even been given time yet to see the problems in Platonism, and you've gone crazy with it, right? Or, they read Hume. They've gone crazy with Hume. Hume's got all the answers. Dude, you're 20. You don't know enough philosophy yet. Don't go crazy with it. So you have to be careful with the non-Christian philosophers because people go wild and they think that because of the insights they're seeing when they begin, they think, he's got all the answers. And they're not at a point yet where they can see kind of a big picture scope of all the problems in those guys. So, but good questions. Moral Carks, $5. Thank you. Expand your brand by streaming on D Live. Ride the PewDiePie wave. Yeah, I think that sounds like a cool idea. I did see that PewDiePie was doing that. I guess I do need to do that if I can do both. Can you stream from both? I haven't even had a chance to look into it yet. But I did, I put the Twitch up, but I don't do video games enough really to waste time with that. I guess it's still good to have as a backup though, but yeah, the D Live, I guess, sounds like a good idea. Jolene K, $15. Thank you, Jolene. In reference to either or 1 and 2, Either or 1 and 2. Do you mean Esther Hollywood 1 and 2? Oh, Kierkegaard. I'm sorry. Works of Love. Do you classify Kierkegaard as a proto-existentialist? Yes. Is he a Christian philosopher? Yeah, I guess you could argue that kind of in that weird Lutheran way. I do have a couple short essays I did on Kierkegaard from grad school. I think they're still, unless they got nuked, they're still at the website. But I did a critique of him, the way he treats Augustine, because he just kind of goes with a sort of unquestioning Augustinian assumption, as all of the West did. Esoteric Hollywood 1 and 2 are incredible reads. Thank you very much, Jolene. I'm glad that you enjoyed it. Longtime supporter, big Boiler Room supporter, and Jason also supporter. I'm really thankful to you, Jolene. But if you Google jasonanalysis.com and you do Kierkegaard, oh no, wait, I did a whole big essay on Kierkegaard. I forgot about this. I did a great essay, and I say great because it was the first essay that went viral many years ago when I started Jay's Analysis. It got on Reddit in the philosophy page, and then it got 10,000 views. Which for a philosophy paper, dude, that's crazy. Philosophy papers don't get 10,000 views. I think now it's called something like Desolation and Redemption. So there's that essay that I did that you would like, and then I have a smaller one about Kierkegaard and St. Augustine that you would like. If you search Jay's Analysis, they should come up. If they don't, then they got nuked, and I'll have to restore them. But thank you, Jolene. And yes, I think that Kierkegaard is undoubtedly a proto-existentialist sort of Christian philosopher. I mean, I think he would see himself as a Christian. What are the problems, your ruler, $2, what are the problems with E. Michael Jones from an Orthodox perspective? Yeah, that's a good question, and this has come up a lot. I mean, the first problem would be obviously the Thomism, right? I mean, he is a pretty heavy devotee of Thomas Aquinas. He sees Aquinas and Augustine as kind of the solution to all these Western civilization problems. And obviously, as Orthodox, as a traditional Orthodox proponent, we would see the problems of Western society actually embedded in the absolute simplicity doctrine of Augustine, and that was eventually accepted as in Aquinas and dogmatized eventually by Rome. So that's the first problem. Tangential to that is the Hellenism assumption, the idea that Christianity was an intentional attempt to blend Jesus and the Hebrew tradition with the Greek Hellenic pagan tradition. That's not true. That is false. And the mistake is based around mistaking terms, Greek terms, the Septuagint, etc., hypostasis, terms that come out of the Septuagint, for Hellenism and pagan philosophy. When John is doing logos in John 1, not logos, he's not saying that this is the same thing that Marcus Aurelius was talking about. It is true that the pagans are blindly searching for God. But in Acts 17, Paul says the God that you put this unknown statue to is the real God, the one that you don't know. So he can't think outside of his Thomistic box. And that's why he declined to do a debate, is because he knows he's not going to win a theological debate with me on Thomism. Thomas Aquinas and St. Augustine also proposed that brothels should be legal. That a city needs a brothel as a release valve. Now, he acts like we got to set up some kind of puritanical thing. Now, I'm not saying that he's wrong about the degeneracy. Degeneracy can be promoted. But the two people that he wants to go to quite literally said that cities could have brothels as a release valve. I mean, And I'm sure if he addresses that, he's going to say, that wasn't true. It was not the way. That was out of context. I'm sure that's what he'll say. But it's not. I've read those guys more than he has. I can guarantee you that. But they just can't think outside of Thomism. It's an idol. It's an idol for all those people. So logos is from the wisdom tradition of the Bible, Proverbs. It's not borrowing from Marcus Aurelius. Yes, John is trying to appeal to people in the Greek Koine speaking tradition. But Christianity is not a synthesis of paganism and pagan philosophy and Hebrew texts. No, it's not. And I'll tell you what he ought to read, which would change his mind, is Volume 1 of God, History, and Dialectic. This would completely decimate his incorrect assumptions. This is the end of any Thomism right here. It's over. And you say, well, yeah, but Farrell doesn't adhere to all this anymore. It doesn't matter, because all Farrell's doing is synthesizing arguments that are in Gregor Palmos. And the fathers. So that's the main problem with E. Michael Jones is two different starting points. And it's the same with all Roman Catholics. So if you want to know the problem with E. Michael Jones and the whole trad Catholic scheme, and he acts like the Vatican II popes helped no, they didn't. The Vatican II popes were completely involved in all this nonsense. There's no trad reading of Vatican II. It's time to give up these trad myths. I tried to do that for a long time, and it's just not true. But that's what they worship, that system. It's a man-made religious system that contains aspects of Orthodox Christianity because it shares the first millennia with us. And then it turns into a giant papal nonsense scheme, a giant international racket of Vatican Bank nonsense. The Vatican Bank didn't begin at Vatican II. And so if you want a critique of that, read Occult Renaissance Church of Rome, which shows that the problems aren't the 20th century. The problems go back to the Renaissance. So that's what's wrong with E. Michael Jones. Misty earns $1. Thank you, Misty. Much appreciated. John Mike, $5. Is it possible to convince yourself to believe in something that doesn't make sense to you? This is an interesting question. It's actually the question of self-deception. Bahnsen wrote his master's or PhD thesis on self-deception, which is an interesting question. And he had a kind of a little overly rational explanation, in my view, of what is going on in the process of self-deception. But maybe he's right. I don't know. It's kind of a weird, involved type of thing. But he tried to make it into a thing where, like, when you're self-deceiving yourself, you're convincing. So, like, let's say I believe that Bill Cosby is divine. Okay, I don't believe Bill Cosby is divine, but let's say I have self-deceived myself that Bill Cosby is divine. Okay, so if we write this out, I believe Bill Cosby is divine, right? Now, when we talk about this, and I think of this proposition, there's like one level where you could say, Jay believes Bill Cosby is divine. But when I think about myself, and we can kind of raise that to a meta level question, and I think Jay believes the proposition, Bill Cosby is divine. Then it becomes, let me phrase it like this. And this may sound a little obtuse, but it is an interesting question. I'm not saying this is right. I don't actually know exactly what's going on in self-deception, but it's almost kind of like a Hegel kind of view of this. where what he does is he raises the question a little bit higher, and he says that instead of just saying, I believe Bill Cosby is divine, if I myself think about my own reasoning, then I can think Jay knows that Jay believes Bill Cosby is divine. Now, I'm not saying that's true, but I'm saying that if I recall, I think that was Bahnsen's thesis on how self-deception works. I don't know. Maybe that's right. Maybe that's a little too abstract and nonsensical and pointless. I don't know. I don't know that we, Paul talks about the mystery of iniquity to the Thessalonians. So just like as it is with aspects of God and his relationship to the world and the infinite, apophatic theology, there's always an element of mystery. So in the same way with evil, or with self-deception, which is an aspect of evil, there's an element of mystery involved there too. I don't know that we really know how it works in the psyche of a person that is involved in extreme self-deception. Now, we all, to a degree, have a bit of self-deception. We all, to a degree, have a bit of pride and narcissism, you could say, to a degree, just because we're fallen human beings. And of course, theosis is the process of, moving away from sins and moving away from self-deception. But even, as long as we're in this life, in this body, in this fallen state, there's always going to be some degree of self-deception, some degree of, of lack. So I would say, is it possible to convince yourself to believe in something that doesn't make sense to you? I would say yes, and that is self-deception. And Scripture, our anthropology, does speak of self-deception. And I would say ultimately that in our belief system, that anything evil, any evil that we participate in, would to a degree fall into that category. John Mike, $5 again. He says, no, sorry, that's the same question. Oh, sorry you asked that question twice there, John Mike. Hope that if you need like a refund or something, you can email me and I'll send you $5 back, because I guess you tried to do the same question twice. All right, Grunge Monkey, £2. Tips on retaining book info and making good notes. Yeah, well, I mean, I was kind of blessed, thankfully, with a fairly photographic memory, especially for images and stuff that I read. So for me, it's pretty easy, but a lot of that's a question I do get quite often. And what I find helps and works the best for me is to always have a pen and always have these little sticky notes. I don't have any system to it. People always say, "What do the different colors represent?" They don't represent anything. They have absolutely no significance. They're just colors because they come in a colored 5-pack. So I always have these around. And the reason they're helpful is sometimes it's for going back and finding the section. That's true. But typically, they're just so that I can myself write something out. Now, for a long time, I wrote in my books. And I thought, well, these are all paperbacks. They're not going to be worth anything. And then I started noticing that a lot of the paperbacks I had were on Amazon for $200, $300, $400, $500. And I thought, shit, I wrote in all of my damn books. Now, if I become mega famous in 20 years, then the fact that I wrote in my books will make those books worth more. Perhaps. But in the meantime, if I needed to sell those books, I guess I could still get a decent price for them. But I wrote all in my books. So I kind of wish I hadn't done it. But then again, I'm like, well, I still learn stuff because I'm visual in the way I do it. So anyway, long story short, if you don't want to write in your books because you think the book might be worth something, write on your sticky notes. That's the point of them. The point of them is not so necessarily that you can find the thing, but you want the mind to be visually engaged in writing the idea of that page or that section. And some pages have 2, 3, 4 sticky notes. So that's what helps. And people say, why did you underline in all your books? I did it because if I'm visually going through it again, it's sticking in there. It works. So, but good question. I do get that question a lot. That's what works for me. I mean, you look at this old Bible that I had for many, many, many years. Look, this thing is a nightmare, dude. Look at that. Like the whole Bible's like that. But that's how you learn it. That's what works for me. All right. Gabriel R., $5. What is the traditional expectation of the Lenten fast that everyone that has the ability needs to fast strictly? Is it sinful to break the fast? Yeah, I would say that typically the expectation is up to your ability to do what you can. Is it sinful to break it? Well, it depends on the situation. I mean, it's not about being a legalistic bean counter. The point of it, remember what Jesus says about the Sabbath? The Sabbath is made for man, not man for the Sabbath. The point of these things is to help you. It's not to be a legalistic check mark thing. Like if you checked all the check marks and you did everything perfectly, then you get saved. No, it doesn't work like that. The point is just for you to learn self-control. That's the point of all ascetic exercises or practices. It's not to earn points with God. It's to help you. It's a medicinal thing for you to learn self-control. That's it. It doesn't gain you points. It doesn't gain you mystical powers magically. So, I mean, if you are willfully saying, I don't give a damn, that's when it would be a sinful thing. If you were, it's the attitude is to, it's not to have a legalistic attitude towards these things. DC Customs 2016, $10. Could you discuss the finer points of the trivium and the quadrivium? What would you recommend for adult autodidacts to approximate the two classical schools? The easiest thing is the book Trivium and Quadrivium. I mean, if you already have this, I don't know what else would be easier, right? But there's these two books. I don't have the Trivium with me. I do have the Quadrivium with me. They're only $20, and they're, a simple 100 and, well, no, actually they're 400 pages, but it lays it all out. I don't know what else. I mean, if you try to get really into it, you can. You're welcome to, but you're going to be getting really deep into medieval stuff. And actually, I did get a neat book today in the mail, Medieval Number Theory. I got Medieval Number Theory, which is a really awesome looking book. I'm looking forward to getting into that. But for the adult autodidact, those two books, I mean, I don't know what else would be better or easier than that. And it is trying to approximate the classical approach. I mean, it's tying all of these different fields like geometry and music into into time and space. So if you already had that book, DC Customs, I apologize. To my knowledge, that's what's out there. I'm sure that people are going to be crafting their own systems, and you could find, I'm sure, eventually some kind of book on Amazon that would be a more scholarly approach. This is kind of written for a pop audience, but I'm sure you could just Amazon, a scholarly approach to that question if you want to get deeper into it. Some people even were getting into medieval Tractatus and all this kind of stuff. You can do that if you want to, but it doesn't have to be that involved. Brian Highlands, $2. A new annual subscriber. Thank you for your work. Thank you, Brian. I'm glad to have you on board. I think you'll enjoy the members section. A lot of content there, a lot of talks, a lot of different material, different subject matter. I still got to fix. It's all pretty much repaired, by the way, since the nuking, except for the esoteric Hollywood part. I keep forgetting to fill out the rest of the bottom of the page. But everything is there. You just right click and save if you want to download the audios. There's also the YouTube, mostly audio versions you can click over to. So I try to keep it simple because we do have a lot of boomer and older age subscribers, and it's just the more simple I can keep it, the easier it is. I don't have to answer as many tech questions. I'm not a tech person. I hate the tech questions, but I have to do it. It's part of the job. So thank you, Brian. Glad that you're here. Hope you enjoy the work. Hope it benefits you. And I want to remind everybody too that we have picked up a lot more tutoring sessions lately. I've been tutoring a lot of people. There are still open slots if people want to sign up on Patreon for tutoring, or you can send me an email. We can do it a different way. It doesn't have to be Patreon. It's just that on the Patreon, it's already set up for the tiers. If you want to do that, if you don't want to use Patreon, you just want to do it directly with me, you can just send me an email and just say tutoring or consulting. I don't know what you want to call it, but most people want to talk philosophy. Most people want to talk about some theology and some geopolitics. Mostly it's philosophy, which is cool because I feel like, I'm more comfortable talking philosophy. I love talking theology, but I don't want to come off like a guru, the whole guru vibe. I can't stand that, but I feel at home talking philosophy for sure, or geopolitics, globalism, that kind of stuff. So if you do want to set up tutoring, that's available. And typically, I'll negotiate a little bit if people are hard up or something, they want to do it, and they don't want to pay the $100 or whatever. I'm a flexible guy. I'm not money hungry, not grubby. Although the IRS grubbed a good chunk of me today. Thoughts of a Pilgrim, $5. Hey Jay, God bless your work. I hope to support you more often, God willing. Thank you, Thoughts of a Pilgrim. I appreciate that. Again, I'm not here to be a money grubby dude. I'm pretty liberal when it comes to money and being magnanimous and whatnot. So I don't really want to e-beg, but people do find the work helpful, and that's cool. So don't feel obligated, but if you do want to support, it's welcomed. Jethro Tull, $15. Thank you very much. Love that. Love those super chats, those $15. That does help. Nikiforos Focus, Part 2, $5. Top 5 critiques of liberalism as in essays and books. Thanks for all your work. Ooh, that's a good one. I assume you mean classical liberalism and not modern Hillary Clinton liberalism. Okay, the first book I mentioned, Liberalism and Its Critics, is a pretty good book. It's kind of a survey, though, so it's going to have like the top philosophers trying to continue the liberal tradition, like Nozick, and I think maybe Karl Popper's in there, and as we said, Alistair McIntyre is in there with the critique of liberalism, and some of the Isaiah Berlin. By the way, he was in the Royal Society. Did you know that he was at the top? Isaiah Berlin, that came up in the Anglo-American establishment talk. That surprised me. I didn't know he was a high-level, near the top of the pyramid dude, but that was in Quigley's book. But I think Isaiah Berlin is in that book. Most people will say Edmund Burke. I don't really. But Burke was a Mason, so I don't see why Edmund Burke is that great of a dude. I think it helps to understand. A lot of people don't understand liberalism. Like, they don't understand. So if you get Fire in the Minds of Men to understand what the liberal tradition really is, it's revolutionary. So Fire in the Minds of Men, Liberalism and Its Critics. This one, where'd it go? This one, because it shows that it's not just about ideas, it's a revolution in all of society, right? Konstantin Pobyadnatsev, Reflections of a Russian Statesman. Not that long. But it's a phenomenal critique because it's written not just to critique liberalism from some generic conservatism, but actually to point out that this is a completely just social-wide destructive position. And it's not about freedom. It's about complete destruction. And Seraphim Rose's nihilism, of course, would have to be on that list at the top, which we just did a talk on his book, Nihilism. Did I grab that one? Anyway, I just did a talk on it. That was an obvious one. You ought to know about that one. But it's definitely one of the best, and it's an easy read. It's not that long. I guess I didn't bring it over here, but Nihilism by Seraphim Rose. Is that 4 or 5? Critiques of Liberalism. Well, okay. Well, let's get Always Ready by Bahnsen, because we don't need to just critique liberalism. We need to critique the presuppositions of it. So, Always Ready by Bahnsen. That would be number 5. Thank you, Nikephorus Focus. So, let's see. 4 gone, $5. Where'd it go? Scrolled too far. No, wait. I went way too far. Looking forward to doing you in a Vox crossover episode. I'm currently reading through the entire Orthodox study by Logos. Yes, thank you. Of course, everybody ought to have a good copy of. I think it's good. It's really good. I mean, as study Bibles go, it's one of the best, because not just the notes typically are good, but you have the Deuterocanon. Other people are fans of the Eastern Orthodox Bible, EOB. I'm sure it's good. I haven't gotten a copy of that yet, but Orthodox Study Bible is good. Glad you like it. Vox had sent me his ebook of the critique of JBP, and I have not had a chance to get to it. So one of the reasons is I'm not putting him off or anybody else off or anything like that. It's just that I think he wanted to discuss that, which I'm not opposed to that. But when he sent that was right when I was super busy. So I haven't got a chance to read his critique. I've listened to, a lot of his shows. But yeah, I don't know if he only wanted to have a discussion just about his book, which I don't object to that. But I know he's busy too. He probably didn't have time to read my stuff. So I don't know if he's read Esoteric Hollywood, probably not. I should send him a copy, but I think a lot of people get mad but I don't actually have a Kindle version of my book. I have like the pre-edited PDF of my book, but I don't even have the Kindle of my book to send anybody. I don't know. So I hope he didn't take offense to anything like that. But Brandon Sanderson, I'm sure maybe down the road he'll want to chat. I don't know. Brandon Sanderson, $10. Hey Jay, what is your opinion on Kierkegaard and his criticism of Hegel? Yeah, I mean the Hegelian stuff, all of the philosophers are caught in dialectics and they go too far with stuff. That's the problem. I mean, Hegel is this ridiculous idealist, and it's just there's insights in there, and he's kind of continuing the Platonic sort of tradition with the idealism, German idealism, but it just ends up being completely useless, and that's why Marx turned it on its head, right, to try to make it useful. And so, yeah, any kind of existential criticism of the overly rational idealist positions is going to be valid. But that doesn't mean that romanticism or existentialism is true. This is the thing. Everybody wants to have one thing that explains everything. And no philosophy dreamt up by a dude is going to be able to do that, right? That's when it verges over into the realm of theology. Theology can do that. So I would say that Kierkegaard's criticism, wait a minute, let me think about that for a second, because if I recall, I mean, is this where romanticism comes into play? Is that right? I have an essay, I think, on this. Yeah, I think that's right. Like the romanticists, they arise out of this. It's an existential response to the overly rational views of German idealism. But that's not, they're just still these human schemes. That's the problem. And then we wouldn't even be in this mess if Western theology had not melded with Hellenic Platonism. That's what happened. But yeah, so what you want to read is my essay. My long, viral, at one time essay on Kierkegaard. Let me see, what is the title now? I don't even remember. It is called Desolation and Redemption. It used to be named something else, but it was a grad paper I wrote before my website got nuked. I'll put it in here in the chat here. And then there's another paper I did about Kierkegaard and Augustine that you can dig up. But I'll put it in the chat and I'll put it in the description. But I think if I recall, I go into the reaction against the overly rational, just ridiculous idealisms of, and actually Kant too. Kant's in the German idealist tradition too. So Hegel and Kant have this problem. Let's see, I scrolled up again too far. Landbjort, $5. To what extent are we responsible to improve the world contra Peterson's clean your room nonsense? I'm thinking of the parable of the sower. How does it relate to the parable of the sower? I mean, the parable of the sower is not about cleaning up the world, because the parable of the sower, the seed lands in the good soil. That's people that obey, right? And the people who believe for a time and then fall away due to the cares of the world and riches and all that, that's the bad seeds. So I'm not sure how that relates to cleaning up the world. One thing that's misunderstood since the time of the Enlightenment and the Reformation, all this nonsense, is that there was an attempt eventually after, especially the French Revolution, to divorce God from the social sphere. This has gone global, right? This is why you have the secular state. Prior to the 1700s, nobody thought there should be a secular state. Nobody in Russia, nobody in Greece, nobody in medieval Latin or Roman Catholic countries. The whole world believed that the confessional state was part of Christianity. And it was, because it is. Byzantium. Now, however, you would be hard pressed. It's very difficult. I mean, in Russian Orthodox circles, you go into the Russian Orthodox Church and you see the Tsar. You see an icon of the Tsar. You see icon of St. John of Kronstadt, who talked about the monarchy. So I know when I go in that church, I'm not going to get fed jibber jabber about Americanism. And the liturgy prays for pious kings and queens. It doesn't pray for how to erect a democratic, egalitarian bunch of nonsense. Now, because many churches in America are tools of the state, they teach Americanism. And Americanism is the idea that anything in Christianity or the gospel is read through the lens of my boomer American goggles. And so Jesus in that scheme is there to tell you to be pious, to flee from the world because it's of the devil, this Gnostic nonsense. The Benedict option of what's his face? Rod Dreher, all this kind of nonsense. And really, as Mr. Pavlyatsev said a long time ago, he says, when you divorce the church from the state, what you actually get is the state running the church. Exactly. That's what America is. America is not and let me show you. In fact, I just happened to I've talked about this many, many, many times. It's well known. But there are clowns that don't even think this is real. CIA use of journalists and clergy in intelligence operations. You don't live in a free church and state separate country. You live in a country where the clergy are tools of the state, dum-dums. Oh, that was a long time ago. No, it wasn't. This is 1996, goofus. This is an analysis of a recent program. One of many. You think this is the only program? How naive are you? It's like the boomer who was arguing with me today. These people are a joke. They have no idea how the world actually works. Or they're clowns and they work for the establishment. These boomers, man, I'm telling you what, don't listen to boomer advice. It's dangerous. They are going to tell you to get 60 things put into your body by age 3. But you don't even know what they are. And they're going to tell you there's no such thing as what I'm showing you right now. They say that doesn't exist. Did I make this up? Do you think this is a Photoshop? They'll say, yeah, it is. Beware of boomers. So when you separate, when you chop off one of the heads of the double-headed eagle, there's only one head left, the state. And the state runs your church. So the answer I've already covered in the church and state talk. And none of the Americanists believe that because they're hypocrites. And they're going to lose to the Muslims because Muslims are smart enough to know that if God is sovereign, he's not sovereign in your pious sphere. He's sovereign everywhere. They don't care. They're cucked out anyway. These Americanists. So they're going to lose to Islam. And then Islam is going to lose because of the toxic culture. Because in 2-3 generations, their descendants are going to be turned into GMO garbage justice warriors. Where are we at? This thing scrolls so fast, it goes past everything. So we have a responsibility to improve the world in the right order. Okay, so state does not come first. Faith comes first. Then the social sphere comes after that. You can't revert, you can't flip it around and try to, we're going to convert the empire and we're going to have a top down. No, get out of here. Come on. That's nonsense. LARPy. Now, but how that relates to Jordan Peterson's nonsense, I don't even know. I wouldn't even know how to relate that to what he talks about. Nicephorus, Focus, $5. What are the most important dialogues of Plato as it relates to the Orthodox worldview, whether it's truth or heresy? Crito, Phaedo, and Timaeus, and the Apology. And I have lectures on all that. And I guess the Republic, too, as a whole, in a way. Although, I don't know how much that relates to orthodoxy. There's a good essay on Dostoevsky and Plato at Soul the East. I would check that out. Man, if you touch this thing, it scrolls down past 20 people. What are the good resources that you would recommend? Dimension 3500, $20 towards towards leaning Orthodox holidays. Somebody leaning Orthodox concerning holidays and fasting and traditions. Orthodoxy is small in my country, so I'm having to learn everything from O Stavros. from O. Stavros. Oh, I thought it was a name. Stavros Nika from O. Who's O? I don't know who O is. Specifically towards the holidays. Probably that book that always, if you look in the recommended readings, there's a book on the way that the liturgy, which it would include the feast days, obviously. Let me go to my recommended reading page. Let me pull it up. There's a lot of books on here. Orthodox worship a living continuity with the temple and the synagogue in the early church. If that's the kind of work that you're looking for that explains the theological meaning of the feasts and the service, I would say that book. Orthodox worship a living continuity with the temple, the synagogue, and the early church by Williams and Anstall. That would probably be the best introduction to the liturgy for showing that it's in continuity with the Bible. Because you specifically asked about the holidays and the traditions, I'm guessing it sounds Protestant. In other words, that's typically the kind of a thing that a Protestant would have a problem with. And that book is written in a simple way to try to demonstrate the continuity with the Old Testament. DC Customs 2016, $5. Contact you through email or on Jay's Analysis for private tutoring. The contact at Jay's Analysis goes to the email, so it doesn't really matter either way. It's going to come to me. Just put somewhere in there in the title, private tutoring. White Top, $2. Thank you, White Top. Much appreciated. Nick Offinger, $5. You've taught me so much theology over the last year, Jay. Thank you. Thank you, Nick. Glad you've learned a lot. Hope to continue to teach all you guys. I'll let my nose itching like crazy. Get a drink of water. We get some social justice juice. This is the sweat and tears of 5,000 social justice warriors. Nick, I hope that you continue to learn that this is continuing to be a valuable resource. Tactical Boomerism, $5. Our regular fan and friend. Pick one century of Christianity as the best example of the Christian era to aspire to. Ooh, which one would it be? It's hard to say, man, because, from one vantage point, the first 3 centuries with all the martyrs are very important because that's what converted the Roman Imperium. It was the blood of the martyrs that's the seed of the church, right? So you've got all these martyrs for the first 300 years. That's really the power that converts the Roman Imperium to become Byzantium. And it's really hard to say whether there's like one ideal century because nothing in this life is going to be ideal, but it was normative and it was correct to have a confessing state. I mean, that's just completely anathema to the modern world and even modern so-called orthodoxy. But who cares? I mean, who doesn't see that the last 4 centuries of the Enlightenment and all that were satanic? And it's led to all this degeneracy we see today. So there's not really. I don't know. I wouldn't even know how to pick. It's an interesting question, but I wouldn't know how to pick the era to aspire to. Maybe, I don't know. I mean, one of the things they say about Byzantium is that even in the days of, like St. Gregor Palamas, even in the markets, the lay people would be debating the theology. That's pretty amazing. So maybe some period during Byzantium. I don't know. Reptar goes real $5. Jay, I live in South Florida. How do I find the church that is not corrupt? There's no perfect answer to this because humans are humans everywhere, and there's no perfect way to know. You just have to test them out and try them out and see. I mean, there's obvious litmus tests that you can go by. You can visit the different ones, talk to the priests, talk to the deacons. If you feel bold enough, say, hey, do you support Freemasonry? If they say yes, don't go there. If they say that the Bible has errors and, whatever other litmus tests you want to come up with, don't go there. Now, if it's a little bit more difficult, that's the only option that you have. But that has to be up to you, whether you feel like if the only option you have is some corrupt local church, let's say, I don't know if that's your case, but let's say it was, you have to decide if it's in any way beneficial to you to go there. And if not, then you're better off not going. That's what I would say. What are you going to do? Go be screwed over by a bunch of corrupt people? Who would say that? Spec 7 Re 82. Is everybody associated with AFR questionable? I don't make judgments on everybody associated with that place because I don't know all the people associated there. And there's a whole bunch of podcasts on there. I just don't pay attention to them anymore, and I haven't for many years. So I can't make sweeping judgments. It's not my intention to make sweeping judgments. It's only my intention to look at the things that are being promoted and say, why would anybody want to support that? That's ridiculous. Podcasts on climate change? Get out of here. What? Kev Love, $2. Can I find a non-cuck church in Chicago? Man, I wouldn't go to Chicago. Get out of Chicago, bro. But I know that you live there or whatever. Probably. Try to find a Russian Orthodox church if you can. Try to find it's probably your best bet. You just have to visit the ones that are there. But, I haven't been to Chicago in 15 years, 12 years, 13, somewhere in there. I don't know. Why do people want to live in Chicago? I wish I had better advice, but you just have to see what's near you and visit and see which one works best. I don't have like a barometer of every single church. Byron Price, $1.99. Debate Taylor Marshall. I said on Twitter 2 days ago I'd be willing to debate. I even tweeted at him. I included him. I said, would you want to do a debate? I think I did. Or I mentioned it in the comments. One of the two. He's not going to debate me, dude. He doesn't want to do that. If he wants to do it, I would do it, but he's not going to debate me. Come on. All right. So looks like, unless I missed any, and I apologize to the screw up stream earlier. I did miss a couple super chats on the screw up stream. Apologize for that. OBS update threw my audio off. So, but we've been going for 2 hours and 6 minutes. I don't see any more. Don't see any more questions. I'll look here and see if there's anything in the chat. People are bringing up Destiny. Look, I already said I would debate Destiny. There was an email. He said he was down to do it. I said, okay, I'm down. And then I didn't hear back. So he probably got busy or decided he didn't want to do it or whatever. So Destiny, I'll debate Destiny. I don't care. I'm not afraid to debate Destiny. I've been waiting on a reply. So most of the time what happens, and I'm not saying that people are being cowards, but most of the time what happens is that a debate gets mentioned. This happened with Matt Dillahunty, Destiny. I'm sure some other people, but I say okay. They say they're up for it. I say okay, and then I never hear back. So we got another super chat here. Jake Desjardins. Jean Dujardin. Jake Desjardins. Jake the Sardine says, what are your favorite places to travel to? Well, I haven't done a whole lot of world traveling. I've only been to the UK last year to speak at AV9. Was that last year or this year? Last year. Last year to speak at AV9. Would eventually, I guess, like to travel more. So, I want to see Israel. I want to see the biblical sites, the tombs of the prophets. That'd be neat. I want to see Italy. I want to see Florence. I want to see Greece. I want to go to Greece for sure. Russia would be cool. See Moscow, St. Petersburg. When I went to the UK also, I didn't get a chance to go to Ireland and Scotland. I come from a clan Maxwell, clan Scott. So it would be cool to see Caerlaverloch, which is the clan Maxwell Castle. Or clan Maxwell Castle. It'd be cool to see that. So Ireland and Scotland, yeah. I don't care about anywhere cold. I don't care about. So, I mean, if I was invited to Norway or one of those Nordic cucked countries, I guess I would go. But anyway, that's an interesting question. Don't usually get that question. So, but one of the reasons I moved to Florida was because the beach and the weather. And the weather in Tennessee sucks. And if you have allergies, Tennessee sucks. So sun and sand, dude. Seafood, sun, sand. Better church here. What else? Travel to, yeah. Key West was kind of fun. It's very boomery though. It's kitschy and boomery in Key West, but it's kind of cool. But there's also no beaches down in the Keys, which if you've not been to the Keys, do not make the mistake of thinking there's beaches. There are no beaches in the Keys. There's like a couple man-made beaches, but there's no sand down there. It's like reefs. So I'd like to go to Costa Rica. One of those kind of places would be cool. Anyway, interesting question. Slav K, 5 pounds. What's an I want to go to Georgia too. I hear Georgia's pretty cool. Not Georgia in the U.S. What is an excuse for an Orthodox Christian to wear a Masonic noose? What is an excuse? You talking about a tie? Like a suit and tie? Because sometimes people say that's a Masonic noose. I mean, sometimes an idea comes from a pagan thing, like wedding rings. Aren't wedding rings pagan from the Roman Empire? And then over time, they lose that significance. They're not directly pagan anymore. So if you mean a suit and tie, it's not an excuse. It's just that's developed into being what the culture wears. I mean, I'm sure at some point wearing togas had some connection with the gods, but just because you wear a toga doesn't mean that it's pagan. But if you mean something more specifically like a Masonic noose, I don't know why there would be any excuse to wear a Masonic noose unless you're being initiated into the lodge. I mean, which you can't do because you can't be a Christian and a Freemason at the same time. But the suit and tie, I don't know, it's just what became the norm in the West. I don't know. And yeah, it probably does have Masonic roots. I don't know. I don't actually know. I've heard that, but I don't exactly know if that's true. If it is, okay, well, but it doesn't have that significance anymore. So when something loses that significance, it doesn't really, no point in being legalistic about it, like as if everybody's who wears a suit and a tie is secretly a Mason. That's crazy. All right, but interesting question. A lot of good questions. Thank you guys. I'm getting tired. We've done 2 hours here. That's enough for the Q&A. Hopefully this was fruitful. Hopefully we answered a lot of questions. A lot of people said, please do a Q&A because I do keep getting the same questions over and over and over. And it doesn't matter how many times we do these streams because in 3 months, All of these questions that have been asked here will be re-asked again. But that's cool. That means hopefully it means we're getting new people, and it's not the same people with amnesia, right? But thank you guys for the super chats. God bless. I don't see any more. Hopefully I gave everybody priority that was doing super chat. I don't think I answered any questions from the chat, but that's cool. All right. Debate who? I don't know who Imam Tawheed is. That sounds like a fake name, but somebody's trying to set up a debate with a Muslim philosopher. So actually 2 people are trying to set that up. One dude who's a Muslim guy on Twitter is trying to set up a debate, and then another friend of mine is also trying to set up a debate with a Muslim. But the problem seems to be that there's a lack of kind of philosophic common language, because a lot of those guys obviously, I guess, speak Arabic or whatever. So there's a difficulty in having that kind of a debate due to the linguistics. And people always say debate giant figure so and so. Dude, I don't have the capabilities to just debate like somebody with 1 million followers. If people make a big enough stink, like on Twitter or whatever, and it gets their attention, maybe. But that's how it gets done. Like, you guys have to do that. Like, I don't have an agent that I can say, call Jordan Peterson's agent and set up a debate. It doesn't work like that. I don't have an agent, dude. Anyway, God bless you guys. Have a good night. Thank you for tuning in. Good discussion. We will talk soon. Next up, next up I will do the part 2 of the Aristotle pagan analysis, because I did make that a half-half. So we'll do that. And then after that, for subscribers, will be the part 2 of Julian Huxley, which I was working on today. And so, yes, those things are coming. Be patient. Thank you. Have a good night. Talk to you soon.